and welcome to Culture, the Culture Show with Jason Winslade and Lilith Dorsey. I'm Jason Winslade. This is my co-host.
Lilith Dorsey, thank you so much for watching. We're going to get into it today.
Indeed. So our topic for today is like water for chocolate, or the Spanish title.
Como agua para chocolate. I apologize for my bad Spanish, but it might be better than yours, Jason. I don't know.
I mean, it's a toss-up. Yes. So, like water for chocolate, 1992 film. Um, it's a Mexican romantic drama. I remember seeing it in college. Must have been, when we see all the art films on Saturday night at the Snipe Art Museum at Notre Dame. I'm sure this was one of the ones that we saw, because I do remember seeing it and liking it. I don't remember the circumstances or who I saw it with, or whether it was a romantic evening or not. Um, but but it is a very romantic film. Um, and it earned 10 Ariel Awards, including the Best Picture, was nominated for Golden Globe Award for Best Foreign Language Film. It was the highest grossing foreign language film ever released in the United States at that time. So it was pretty popular. But is it? I was wondering. I was going to ask you: is this something that, because I haven't thought of this film in a long time. I haven't heard anyone talking about it. I'm not sure if it's like, how much is it still in the cultural consciousness? Is it something that what's its significance for you?
I mean, I saw it when it came out. I don't think it was within a romantic context, but I think I had read it first, or I saw the trailers or whatever, and then I wanted to both see it and read it because it's so beautifully written. But it's not something I ever hear anybody talk about, you know. And when I went to go find it, we had to do some searching and we had to pay for it and all of those things. So I don't think it is something that's really within the cultural context. Obviously, it's going to hold more significance for, you know, Mexican people who I think relate to a lot of the themes, because for me it seems very Mexican, and it talks about a lot of those things that I think, you know, at least people our age and probably even older and younger, you know, grew up hearing stories about the Mexican Revolution and how things were, you know, both before and after. And I think this really is a piece that's situated at that space and time, and that's something that's rare. But for me, it's one of the most magical films. You know, I'm a kitchen witch, and I don't think there really is another film that does as good a job of sort of melding this magic and culinary arts and also feminine traditional spaces. All of these things go in and out of this film. And for those of you who don't know, we've been sort of taking turns shifting off either one or two each. So this was definitely my pick. And it was my pick because this is something that I think, in addition to being a magical film, it's also a film almost anyone can relate to. So that was something that I really liked about this.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great film, and like I said, I have seen it. It's just it's so I like that we're sort of like, we dig into the crossroads of pop culture and occultism, and indeed that we are kind of digging this one up from the past, from our youth, as we were probably both in college at the time, and
Yeah.
and so that, yeah, that's definitely part of our past. So let's see. So it was published in the novel was published in 1989, so just only a few years prior, by Mexican novelist Laura Esquivel, and she wrote the screenplay for it. So it's very, very closely connected to the book, obviously. Um, so yeah, for those of you who haven't seen it, the basic premise is, well, it starts in a kitchen, of course, and it starts and ends in a kitchen. And um, I also like, you're a kitchen witch. I wouldn't necessarily call myself that, but I do I do like to cook, and I like the alchemy of cooking, and so this does appeal to me too. And and it's sort of like almost like in a way a cousin to our High in the Hog episode, right? Um,
Yeah, definitely. Since you're talking about the opening, I've got this quote here that she wrote about, Tita was pushed into the world by a torrid stream of tears. She gets born on the kitchen table in
right.
this giant flood of, amniotic fluid and tears and everything else, which they then sweep up and put in a big sack and use to season the food. So I
Right.
just love it.
I
It's
mean,
kind of
yeah,
gross, but I love this
that metaphor
image.
just frames it so well. Yeah, because it solidifies and becomes salt, and so
Mm-hmm.
that's the salt they use to season the cooking. So yeah, the framing device is, we find out later, is the main character Tita's um um her niece, or no, her great niece, great grandniece or whatever, because there's a whole thing where you put the onion on top of your head
Yes.
so that you don't cry as much when you're cooking onions. And they even show like the baby with the half onion on top of her head, and I'm like, not sure if that works. I could try that, because I do have onion issues sometimes. I usually just put my onions in the fridge so they don't, aren't as pungent. But
Oh, that's smart. I like that.
I
I
mean,
like that.
you know
I love the way she says that the problem with crying with onions is that you might never stop. I just love that. It's just so beautifully written, and all of these, not just the concepts she's including, but also the language and it doesn't surprise me that she wrote the screenplay, because this is one of the best screenplay writing I've ever seen. It's so eloquent and beautiful, and the film mirrors that in a lot of ways.
yeah, it's firmly entrenched in the genre of magical realism for sure. Um, and so yeah, it's set in it starts at like 1895, roughly to the mid 30s in Mexico. But of course, I think one assumes that the grandniece or whatever is speaking in the present tense of the 90s. Um,
Yeah, in Mexico City, I think that's made clear in the book, if not the film.
okay, yeah, yeah. Right. So it is the story of a family that uh, is pretty well um, uh, set by tradition, right? And the mother and the father and the three daughters. Um, we find out pretty early on that the second daughter is more than likely an illegitimate child of a mulatto lover that the mother was in love with, and kept his keepsakes and his picture in a locked box. But the rumor comes out, and apparently, and that's enough. And that's the thing about this film, is that emotions become physical, right? So he finds out and gets a heart attack. So the with these three daughters, the tradition is the youngest daughter can never marry, and has to take care of the mother, and just remain, or basically remain a virgin for the rest of her life. And my first thought was like, well, how you know, I mean, I knew this wasn't going to happen, but I was like, well, why doesn't the daughter just poison the mother and be done with it, then move on,
Tita's
but it's not that
Tita's
kind of
way
film.
nicer than that,
Right, it's not that kind of film. But it won't surprise you who my favorite character is. Like,
Gertrudis.
of course, of course.
I think she's I'm not sure she's the second daughter. Did they say that? I thought.
Yeah, yeah. She's the
Oh,
middle.
okay.
She's the middle
Okay.
daughter.
Yeah, yeah. She's
Um,
literally the redheaded, she's got the
right.
redheaded wild child, right?
Yeah,
Like I identify with Gertrudis as well. I know
yeah.
I'm
And
not a
we'll
redhead,
talk more
but for
about
those of you who
Gertrude.
know me, my daughter is a redhead. So
Right.
obviously I carry those genes.
We'll talk more about Gertrudis in a minute. I think probably should set up that. So the premise of the film is that Tita is in love with the young man Pedro, and he's in love with her. But because of her mother's rule that her youngest daughter can't get married, she offers her oldest daughter to him, and he says yes. so that he can ostensibly be near Tita, his true love, and thus creates the tragedy and drama of the story. And one of the first indications that we have of this magical realism, besides that opening kind of mythic thing about her being born on the kitchen table, is that her tears, Tita's tears, get into the cake mix for the wedding cake. And so the effect and the scene is that everybody starts crying and ultimately has to go to the river to throw up the cake, because they're all, because her angst, her anguish is it permeates the cake, and everyone thinks about their frustration over love, or their lost love, and that's when we see her mother look at the box of keepsakes of her mulatto lover. Um, so that kind of sets it up, and we see the various influences on her. Nacha, I believe was their name, is the cook and servant. There's a very strong relationship there. I mean, I guess you'd call them middle class, this family ish, because I mean they have servants, but their relationship to the servants is very much family. The younger servant, Checha, I think, is like another sister.
Yes.
Yeah. And so yeah, Nacha, tells her, gives her some of the secrets and some of the cooking that gets passed down. Tita gets most of it from her, not from her mother, and Tita becomes the cook of the family. So that's her role, domestically, but it's also her art and magic. So yeah.
It sort of transcends everything, right? It transcends both time and space, because we're simultaneously in the kitchen of the great niece in Mexico City in modern times, and back in this kitchen of Tita throughout the years with every dish. You were talking about the tears going into the wedding cake. She talks about how it's poisoned by tears. She tries so hard not to get the tears into it, and then Nacha yells at her, and I wrote down what she says happens. Like, they've got that longing for the lost love, then there's weeping, melancholy, yearning, and then finally it turns into this emetic where they're violently vomiting. So there's this, we have to be careful about what we put into our food, which, as far as I'm concerned, is magic 101, and just this importance of something that you take into yourself and your body repeatedly over and over again. But it is a magical thing, and it can, heal, and it can also harm if we're not careful, whether we want to or not. I remember having a conversation with somebody who used to cook for a Hare Krishna kitchen, and they were very specific about who could cook in the kitchen. Like, if you were sad, you couldn't be in the kitchen. Like, if you were angry, you couldn't be in the kitchen. And I think this is something that we see in a lot of pagan traditions too. I know it's in my tradition of all the ATRs. It has to be somebody who's like initiated and blessed and in the right headspace in order to prepare that food for ritual. So I think this is something that is almost automatic. And I was mentioning before how I like this combination of, it's stuff that people might not even think of as magical, right? A lot of us grew up in our grandmother's kitchens. And I mean, there's even a thing about it, our grandmother's kitchens. So how we know that, oh, okay, you put the onion on your head, or you stir the pot this way, or you don't, say angry words over the stew. All of these things, I think, are sort of internalized traditional magic that we get. But I did find a wonderful article called Ritual and Sacred Space in Laura Esquivel's Like Water for Chocolate by a professor named Rosa Fernandez Levin. And it sort of talks about the kitchen as this bastion of tradition. So it's a space where we can still be traditional. We see so much happening to them here, right? Later we see Gertrudis run off with the revolutionaries and things like that. So this is really a time of great change in Mexico, but we still see these traditions carried on. The quote I have from her article is belonging to an ancient cultural legacy, but also because they are permeated with mystical, mythic, and magical connotations that signal strange events and long forgotten rituals. So there's this ritual element of things that Tita does, and I love the way whenever anybody asks her for her recipes, she just says, you have to make it with much love, mucho amor. So, and at the end, we see her saying that again to somebody. She's just like, I hope you get it right, which is the most shade sentence in this entire
Right.
film. But
Yeah.
it's like,
He's like, how
you've lived
crude.
this many years, bitch. You still haven't
Right.
had a lot of love. I hope you get some. But I just think that it's beautiful that even though she sort of serves as an outsider to everybody else's life, they still keep coming back to her because of this food. Gertrudis shows up when she's supposed to marry the doctor and asks for the cream fritters, like only she has the recipe for this cream fritters. And it's been something that she's out on the battlefield dreaming about and wishing that if she could only, and she leaves with like a jug of them when she goes back to war. So I just love this. She's like, we would win everything if we just had these cream fritters. So
Yeah.
there's a way in which having these things from our childhood that were magical and powerful and can give us a strength and a fortitude through the most difficult times. And we see that over and over again. So beautiful.
Yeah,
So beautiful.
she says that the revolution wouldn't be so bad if we could come home to this cooking, So it's like, yeah, it sustains the culture. I mean, that was really moving what you're saying about what brings us back, because yeah, I mean, you know being not not a woman in these kinds of spaces, but yet adjacent to a tradition of Italian cooking. And I talked about how and the High and the Hog episode, I think we talked about how my grandparents, Italian grandparents, had a restaurant in the 50s, and just the my grandmother's sauce, even though she was gone by the time I was 5 years old, I still have that memory of my grandmother's sauce, that that would be cooking all day. And that's a touchstone of my, you know for lack of a better term, unconscious existence, the almost that Proustian moment, right?
Right.
We were talking about this before, about this contrast between Proust's thing with the Madeleines, and the Mexican version of this, which is very, very different and much more. It's much more feminine in a I don't know how you say it. Like it's a more powerful thing, because Proust's whole thing is sort of an objectifying of the feminine in the food, whereas in this case it's the heart of things. You could probably explain this better.
Yeah, no, I think it is. And I think it elevates, she's sort of relegated to the kitchen as this low status, but the reality of it is she transforms everyone's life. When she makes those quails with rose petals, which I write about in my book because it's just such a powerful scene of getting these rose petals from Pedro and then using them to make these quails with these beautiful rose petals all over, and everybody just sort of gets like almost a transformational erotic
Oh, yeah.
experience, and her just runs out to take a shower, and then the shower house goes on fire and she runs naked into the arms of her lover. So it's like there's all of these
Great scene.
scenes, whereas which I know such a beautiful scene. There's all of these scenes in which the food is the catalyst, and the food is the thing that really drives people to experience their true selves and their true reality and their true destiny, and allows them to sort of transform that. I feel really bad that we don't have a Mexican on the show with us today. We do have some Dia de los Muertos little elements here and there. This was from a good friend of mine who passed, named Michelle Bear. She brought this back to me from Mexico City. But I do have a really good friend from Mexico City, and for our Dia de los Muertos this year, I had bought some pan de muerto, which, if you've never had it, is bread that they make at the time for ritual bread for the dead, and it contains orange flower water. And I brought some to a friend of mine who grew up in Mexico City, and he's like, "This is my grandmother's house." He hasn't been in his grandmother's house in Mexico City with his grandmother there since he was about 5 or younger, like you mentioned, but yet tasting this, smelling it, having a piece of it could bring back that person. And I think it does that for all of us, whether we consider ourselves witches or kitchen witches or magical people, even. It allows us to transform time and space to get back to this area where we're just going on our sensorial memory and we're having this transformative experience. And that's what I find so beautiful. And I wish more people did talk about this movie, because I think it would resonate with them on a deep level.
Yeah, I'm wondering if there are anything that even comes close to it. I know we've talked about before how there's that not too long after this movie there was the Chocolat movie with Johnny Depp that had some similar themes in terms of like, putting magic into food and all that. But that's more, as you said, is more of a French version of this. Well, French American.
I
Um,
love the French, I do.
but yeah, I'm trying to think. I mean, I know that there definitely is a food as magic genre in romantic films, and I'm sure that there are some more recent examples than this. I know that that's a thing. I mean, I don't know, maybe Ratatouille could be one of those films. Who knows? I don't know. I haven't seen all of that, but yeah, I mean, I know there's other in the romantic genre. I'm trying to think. There's been a few American things, but yeah, like I don't think we talk about it as much. I think mostly because because the typical Americans don't have these kinds of traditions, um, and or they can't cook or their food sucks. You know?
No, it's true. I mean, I think that, one of the positive, if we can say positive things to come out of lockdown and the pandemic, was a lot more people were cooking and a lot more people were sort of turning back to what magic they could do in their own homes. And cooking was something that they were doing. I got the announcement this morning that they set a release, or they're going to set a release date for Trish Telesco's Kitchen Witches book that I wrote the forward for. So, this is something, again, magical people of a certain age, like you or me, grew up with this book. And it was one of the first, I think, tomes that was full of magical recipes. And it was something that I used a lot back in the, aughts and the late 90s. I don't remember exactly when it first came out, but I know when my girls were little, I was pulling that book every day. Okay, we're having a cranky day as a toddler. Let's make something that's food that's got all the herbs and the magic in it for happiness. And I think that's something and that's why I have recipes in all my books, that it's something simple that anybody can do. It's not rocket science. You don't need to go get a Papanax or some other weird, strange ingredient to put in your magic. You can go to the grocery store and get flour and eggs and sugar and make it into something magical. And that's what I see as beautiful. But we did want to talk about the character of the doctor. This is
Right.
definitely a feminine story, but I think the doctor is something that, for me, sort of formed this bridge between the old world and the new, right? Like, he's a medical doctor. He's who they call whenever there's a serious, medical issue. But he also talks about coming from an indigenous lineage and learning things from that part of his family. And I think it's so beautiful.
Yeah, there was one scene where he gives her some kind of a idea about what to put in food, and she gets confirmation of the wisdom by Nacha, her old nurse cook, because in the movie dead people just appear all the time, and that's just what it is. So she gets confirmation from her, but also this other person that we've never seen before or see after, that I assume in the scene is the doctor's ancestor that he mentions, who is part of an indigenous tribe. So there's definitely that connection, and he has an aunt with him that only speaks English, although it sounds like she's got some kind of an accent. So I was thinking maybe she's Italian or something. I don't know, but it's it's an old woman, but she's speaking English, and there's a few times they go back and forth, and he's like, oh, she's deaf and she can only read lips when it's in English. Um, but yeah, so she there's a certain point in the film where her older sister and her love Pedro, and her their newborn who Tito was nursing, they move away to Texas, by pretty much forced by her mother, and the child doesn't eat and dies because he's so used to Tito's cooking. He
Right.
can't, and the older and her sister can't really cook. So Tita's so distraught by this that she just basically stops talking and goes into a depression, and she's sent off to the doctor's place for him to take care of her. And he's clearly in love with her, but a gentleman the entire time. Later on, when he acknowledges that she truly loves Pedro, he's basically like, I don't care. It's fine that you slept with him while I was gone. I'm just gonna, and I'm thinking to myself, well, this is one of those, I don't think poly is a thing in you know, early 20th century Mexico, but I was like, that could work out. He takes care of her.
Yeah.
Pedro can be, whatever. It could be a whole polycule. It's a whole thing. Yeah, but no. Um, but what's interesting about the doctor is that so he has that indigenous wisdom, but he also talks in a way about almost mythical sense of the soul. Like he's speaking from a almost hermetic alchemical approach, and you see in his office, I guess, he's got the Olympics going. He's like, so he clearly is representing this kind of Western Euro kind of European approach to this kind of thing, and he shows her these drawings, and I'll put these up in a minute. And
Yeah, he talks about, everybody having this sort of hidden flame inside of them that gets represented in the story through these matches, and we have to be careful to only light one at a time, or we will burn up and in a fury of our unrealized passion and love and everything like that, which I think he sees her in a way. It's funny to me because this is one of these things where we've got this indigenous person, but also this man of science seeing things that other people don't see, and seeing things way more clearly than the rest of the characters in the
right,
film do, even the characters who it's happening to, and sort of understanding it in a different way. So he loves her, and maybe he is okay with her being with Pedro once or however many times, but he really wants to protect her, and he really wants to take care of her, which I think is so beautiful, despite whatever machismo, which I think would have been the vibe of the time in
right.
revolutionary Mexico.
Yeah, he's definitely much more of a sensitive soul. In some scenes, he kind of remind me of Thomas Dolby a little bit because he's blonde with the glasses. Um, yeah, these drawings, and I'm not sure what the source of these things is. If this is something his grandmother did, but yeah, it's got I'm looking at it right now. It's got the veve with the eye and the wings in the corner
Yeah,
that are
sort of masonic symbols, things we
right.
may have, I feel like we talk about some of these symbols when we did the episode about Lovecraft Country,
Right,
like
right,
we've got this sort of secret society symbols
right, right.
almost.
Yeah, it says, if you let all your matches at once, they would produce such a strong brilliance, that they're. And he shows another drawing that before our eyes there would appear a tunnel that's just so luminous, and it's got this, the figures of the two, the man, the woman inside this tunnel, and yeah, and the end of the line is about how it is something about the path that we were born on that leads us back to our divine origins. So there's almost this, like, again, this hermetic alchemical wedding thing happening here with these drawings, and with so at towards the end, when she finally is able to make love to her great love without having to hide it, and nobody can hear them, so they go all out, and of course he dies because ecstasy, it's what happens. And so over that is the return to that line that the doctor says about divine origins. And so at that point she decides to eat the entire box of matches, and lights herself and the farm on fire, and that's the end of her story. It goes to the grandniece. So yeah, there's definitely some kind of hermetic wisdom that the doctor knows.
Yeah, like I said, I think it's also fascinating to me that it's the ancient wisdom as well. I got to get this right. Tepezcohuete. And Pedro gets burned the first time because we've got these sort of motifs of tears and fire and things that are very almost primal, right? Like I talk about that in my water magic book about, tears being one of the most powerful forms of magic. It's salty, it comes out of our face. And so, but we've got him telling her to use this on Pedro's burn wounds, and they still use it today. But ironically, it's also the main component in, DMT synthesization. So we've got this thing that in the modern world, yes, it's been commodified and people use it as skin cream and skin ointments and things like that. But it's also in some ways something that allows us for this psychedelic transcendence. So it's this ancient plant medicine that he knows. If you're a kitchen witch, go see it, go check it out. Let us know your other favorite kitchen witch type films, because chances are we may want to cover them on this show since we're both big foodies.
Yeah, it's the movie's available on Amazon, I think, to rent for like $4. So it's accessible if you want it. But yeah, we would love to hear from you about any other sort of kitchen witchery that is kind of our vibe. And but on the other hand of things, so that's one of the things about the movie, is that it's got that little bit of hermetic alchemical thing, which is my vibe. And
Right.
so it's got all the other, so it's got something for everyone. But speaking of that vibe, our next episode, we are going to look at Darren Aronofsky's The Fountain from 2007, I think. I'll have to look that up. But yeah, it's the movie The Fountain with Hugh Jackman and Rachel Weisz that kind of made a big splash at the time. And again, it's something that I think has a small cult following, but doesn't get talked about a lot. And there's a lot of really interesting hermetic stuff going on in that film. So yeah, we'll have plenty to talk about with that.
We got a lot of things going on. We're going to keep bringing this to you. We want to thank everybody so much for joining our Patreon and liking and sharing and donating to us. It really makes all the difference in the world. So we're not just sitting here talking to ourselves. We appreciate it.
All right. So we will see you next time on the Pop Occulture Show. Until then, eat some good magical food. Drink some tea in a touristy Day of the Dead mug.
Eat it up, drink it in, have some chocolate and some cake. We'll see you later.
All right. Next time.